The last time that we met, we spoke a bit about God and how he instructs mankind through the messengers that he sends. And I thought this evening, maybe it would be helpful to turn inward and look at the nature of the soul and what the afterlife is about from the perspective of the Baha'i teachings. Since I've never been there, all I can do is report what has been said to me from Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and those who have written the holy texts of the Baha'i faith. So the soul and the afterlife are a big draw for a lot of people for religion in general. I mean, it was very popular in the 18th century to teach religion from the perspective of what's going to happen to you in the next life. But that's not the first time in which this has been a significant factor to consider. Even in the philosophy of Plato, one of the comments Plato made about what constitutes a true philosopher is he said that a philosopher is a man who chooses to live with one foot already in the grave. Basically, by contemplating the mysteries of the next life, it provides the context with which we can understand this life. And we may...
Okay, okay, can you everybody mute? That would be good. Can you all mute?
Marjan, you can mute people yourself if you just put your cursor in the top right-hand corner of
I have to see who is, okay. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No problem. I'm glad to see Senda joining us. So, but to restate, so Plato said that a philosopher is a man who chooses to live his life with one foot in the grave, meaning that by contemplating the life that is to come after, it provides the proper context for understanding what the meaning of virtue is and what the meaning of a life properly lived is. And when I think about that kind of a view of reality, it reminds me of something like an iceberg, where there's this small little visible part, the tangible part, but that just betokens an immense, enormous thing out of our view that is the real reality. And in a lot of ways, the soul is that for humankind. Human beings and what we see of each other, that's just the beginning of our eternal existence. In a way, we're just all infants for the length of time that we live here. And the soul is our true reality. That is the life we are intended to live. And this existence is birthing us into that life. So it's like this massive, massive iceberg hiding a true reality underneath the surface. So I have some selections from the Baha'i writings throughout this presentation to sort of communicate in his own words what it is Baha'u'llah said about the nature of the soul and the next life. So Baha'u'llah wrote, "Thou hast asked me concerning the nature of the soul. Know verily that the soul is a sign of God, a heavenly gem whose reality the most learned of men hath failed to grasp, and whose mystery no mind, however acute, can ever hope to unravel." So this is one of the great divine mysteries. Now, when I was a kid and I grew up Christian, and when I would learn about the afterlife, it's sort of, this is the picture that would be in my mind, right? You go into this sky-like heaven in which you abide in perpetuity, you having a form that's roughly basically human, an unchanging state of bliss. But this isn't really the Baha'i perspective on what the afterlife is like. In a sense, the afterlife is when real life begins, when this time of infancy and just sort of finding our way into our limbs is over, then the true meaning of our existence begins. And so Baha'u'llah wrote, "Know thou of a truth that the soul, after its separation from the body, will continue to progress until it attaineth the presence of God in a state and condition which neither the revolution of ages and centuries, nor the changes and chances of this world can alter. It will endure as long as the kingdom of God, his sovereignty, his dominion and power will endure." And I remember encountering this when I first had found the Baha'i faith, and I thought this is a very, it makes the afterlife more interesting, you know, than a changeless state of bliss. Now, one of the analogies that Baha'u'llah does give us to sort of help us understand what this next world is like is he compares it to something that we know of in this world. And he says to us that the world beyond is as different from this world as this world is different from that of the child while still in the womb of its mother. And this is an analogy that appears several times because what happens in the world of the womb is that you're entirely unaware of the world that you are there and being fashioned to become a part of. And while you're there, you're developing, you're acquiring these limbs, you're acquiring these faculties, none of which you put to use there in that womb. You know, here you've got these little hands, you've got these little legs starting to grow, starting to develop, but you don't walk, you don't reach out and grab for anything. Your eyes are developing, but you never use them to see. Your ears are developing, but you're not using them to hear. So what's appropriate to that womb world and what really suits the fetus while it's there is not what's appropriate to the adult when it's about to be born, but it needs all those faculties. It needs to develop them. So in the Baha'i writings, it talks about how our soul is like that. It's being birthed by this existence. And while it is here, it is developing the virtues and the spiritual capacities that we will need to thrive in the next world, such as love, such as forbearance, patience, saintliness, kindliness. All of these things that from a purely material, animalistic perspective are actually detrimental to success in this material life, like altruism, right? Altruism is possibly giving up your own well-being for the sake of another person. That's not an animalistic ideal. But as spiritual capacities, not only are these things good in and of themselves because they're virtuous, but these virtues are specifically features and functions of the soul. And as the soul strengthens these abilities and these capacities, then when we pass on from this life and we go to the next, we will find ourselves well equipped for the challenges we'll face there and for the discoveries we'll make there. But another aspect of the womb world is that while we're in that womb developing these faculties that really kind of make no sense while we're in that world, there's also this whole host of people around us while we're in that womb that are loving us, thinking about us, praying for us, eagerly intent on our safety and proper development. Like they're always there around us. We don't know it, but they're picking our name. They're getting a room ready for us to grow up in. They're, thinking about what kind of schools they want us to go to. And we're entirely unconscious of that. So similarly, the next world is not a faraway place, distant and separate from this existence. It is a part of this existence. It is simply imperceptible to us. And so I like this picture because it kind of shows this little embryo, but with the person having their hands around it to show that they're there too. They're part of this whole picture and this story as well. And what we're doing with this soul, one of the things that the soul is acquiring, this ability that it has, is this ability to sense the divine. And that's one of the faculties that we're meant to develop while we're here. So I always have loved the analogy of the compass. It's just like it has a sensitive needle that can point all the way north to the tip of the planet. But for that needle to function, it has to be freed of all of its impediments and distractions. So Baha'u'llah says that when the channel of the human soul is cleansed of all worldly and impeding attachments, it will unfailingly perceive the breath of the beloved across immeasurable distances, and will, led by its perfume, attain and enter the city of certitude. So I kind of think of it as if like there's this invisible part of me, this soul that I just don't have any conception of. But through freeing myself of attachment, through trying to cultivate purity and chastity in my life, what I'm doing is I'm sort of letting that soul have room to breathe. I'm allowing it to inhale and sense the fragrance of what it is that it wants and what it was created for. So I want to take a little break with a song for you. This picture I simply like because there's this great mystical text in the Baha'i faith called the Seven Valleys. And when I first heard about the Seven Valleys, I thought, ooh, that means that there are 8 hills because, valleys are between mountains. So I just picked this picture because it has a lot of mountains. But here's a song for you.
Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. And those souls whose inner being is lit by the love of God, by the love of God, are even as spreading rays of light by the love of God, by the love of God. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. For true love, real love, is the love for God. For true love, real love, is the love for God. For true love. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul.
And as this song says, love is one of the spiritual powers of the soul. And so the writings say that a love that you bear towards any person will survive beyond this death. So another aspect of souls and their influence on this world, because I said they surround this creature growing in the embryo and are assisting it to come into the world. The Bahá'í Writings talk about the influence that souls who have passed on have on this world that we still live in. So Baha'u'llah says that the nature of the soul after death can never be described, nor is it meet and permissible to reveal its whole character to the eyes of men. The prophets and messengers of God have been sent down for the sole purpose of guiding mankind to the straight path of truth. The purpose underlying their revelation hath been to educate all men, that they may, at the hour of death, ascend in the utmost purity and sanctity and with absolute detachment to the throne of the Most High. The light which these souls radiate is responsible for the progress of the world and the advancement of its peoples. They are like unto leaven which leaveneth the world of being, and constitute the animating force through which the arts and wonders of the world are made manifest. I mean, if you think about that, these souls that have gone on, they're like the engines of change for all these miraculous discoveries and advancements we see in the world, all these inspirations that the brilliant people and minds of the scientists have. Maybe some of those are coming from souls. Through them, through these souls, the clouds rain their bounty upon men, and the earth bringeth forth its fruits. All things must needs have a cause, a motive power, an animating principle. These souls and symbols of detachment have provided and will continue to provide the supreme moving impulse in the world of being. Now, I was thinking of Bruce when I put in this next slide here, because this is my little science diversion. So I want to tell a little story about the sun, and then I'll connect it back to our theme of physics. I see you unmuted, Bruce. Are you ready? Are you ready for this, Bruce?
I am.
So one of the interesting things about the sun is that it is the most completely obvious thing in the sky, right? It's insane how big and how bright it is. Yet human beings have been with the sun for as long as we've existed and can remember. Yet it's a fairly recent question for people to be asking, how does it shine so bright? So I went and I looked at the history of what people have thought about the nature of the sun and how it's possible that it not only shines with such intensity, but such consistency as well. And I found that really the first time in recorded history when humans started to directly attempt to answer this question was with Aristotle. So around 350 BC, Aristotle came up with this theory that the sun is not the same type of creation as anything we might find on the earth. That the earthly things are made out of crude matter, which has a tendency to decay. But the sun is made of a completely different substance that he called ether. And ether is this pure, unlimited source of energy that is so imbued with potential that it glows of its own light. So he figured the sun must be made out of this because that's how it shines. And that's why it never stops shining, because it's a heavenly body, not an earthly body. And this belief persisted for a really, really long time. I mean, humanity was quite satisfied with this explanation up until Galileo. And the reason why people became dissatisfied with the explanation is because Galileo invented a telescope. And when he trained this telescope on the sun and started taking images of the sun, he found sunspots. And he was convinced that if this sun is truly made of ether, it would have to be such a pure substance that it would have no spots upon it. Yet here they were, these seeming imperfections on the sun. So that blew the whole ether argument out of the window. So then Galileo said, well, it's got to be made of matter too, like everything else. Like that is a good consistency argument, right? So he imagined it was a gigantic sphere of coal, because at the time that was the thing people knew about that could burn the brightest. And again, quite surprisingly, that theory lasted for a really long time. People did not question whether or not the sun was a giant burning ball of coal. But around 1847, now we're learning more about electricity and fuel and how things combust. And so the scientists of the day started doing some math, and they're like, well, if the sun is a big giant ball of coal, and now we know its mass because they were able to do the measurements needed to find out how far the sun away is, how far away the sun is, and how much its mass is, they realized how big a ball of coal it would have to be. And if it were that size, then how long would it burn for? And when they did the math, it was only 1,500 years, which was even shorter than biblical time. So it can't be made out of coal. So that led this one German physicist, Helmholtz, to kind of scratch his beard and say, well, what could it be? What could provide enough energy that it would live long enough? And his theory, he threw every source of fuel out the window, right? Can't be oil, can't be coal, can't be anything else. And his theory was there is a source of energy it could be, which is kinetic energy. It could be derived from movement, like the movement of things causing friction. And he thought, well, if the sun is one big ball of mass and it starts shrinking, the movement of the shrinking would produce light. And this was accepted. This was the theory that everybody thought was dead on for the next 50 years. But the problem was, a shrinking sun still has a limit to its life. And Darwin and other scientists were discovering fossils that showed a record of the Earth having existed way longer than that theory would allow for. So in 1905, that's when Einstein finally put forth this theory that maybe this is another process. Maybe this is an energy source we have not yet discovered. And he found that it was nuclear fusion that would explain both the brightness and the energy source that they were seeing and its longevity. Now, why do I bring this up? Why am I talking about the sun and the way human beings have understood it? It's because when you explain something, human beings accept a plausible explanation. We accept a workable explanation. And this kind of lets us get to the next step. And this is how science has always progressed. Each one of our explanations lets us move a little bit further along until we realize, well, that doesn't quite describe reality, I'm going to refine it and find now a new explanation. And so we keep discovering these new physical principles and physical laws. Well, the religion is really kind of no different. When we've been told about things like heaven and hell, like the soul and mankind, we've been given explanations that were enough for us at the time. But when we don't move forward in our understanding of these concepts, when we hold back, then it's like staying with Galileo's explanation. But then as science is moving forward around you, that explanation just starts conflicting with science because it's unable to describe the new evidence that you're able to see with your new instruments and your new capacity. So as mankind is advancing in our understanding of human nature, psychology, even our analysis of dreams is relatively new, then we start to discover that maybe the soul isn't exactly what we always thought that it was. And maybe heaven and hell aren't always what we thought they were. And just so, in the Bahá'í Writings, we have a different explanation of these ideas. So one of the concepts that comes up very often in religious texts, going back to the beginning of time, are the concepts of life and death, right? These are the major events of human physical life. And when the scriptures talk about life and death, they use them a little more flexibly than just physical life and death. Like in the Bible, there was a time when when Jesus Christ was moving with his disciples, and one of the disciples said, I have to go back to my village and help with the burial of my father. And Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their dead, right? So he's talking about living people who are engaged in this burial ceremony, but he's calling them dead. So maybe there's a different notion of death. And in Bahá'í writings, this is a little bit more explicit, where it says, by the terms life and death spoken of in the scriptures is intended the life of faith and the death of unbelief. So a lot of these scriptures, they're talking about spiritual realities. They're talking about things that are relevant to our souls more than they are relevant to our bodies. And another one of those concepts is heaven and hell. I grew up with very accurate, not accurate, I would say very lively descriptions of heaven and hell. I remember being in my Sunday school class, and the pastor who was teaching us would say, okay, I want you to hold a candle, your arm over a candle, right? And he would let us hold our arm over a candle. He had one, and we burn ourselves a little bit. And then he said, imagine that it doesn't stop. And the pain never gets any less, and it lasts forever. Like he was trying to really inculcate in us this idea that hellfire was unbelievable torment, and we would be stuck there for eternity. And that's a great motive to try and be a little bit more virtuous for some people. But it's also a very concrete image of hell, right? It was truly believed in that Sunday school that when we died, our soul would either go to one of two places, either a bright, shining heaven full of clouds, or to a place that was all fire and brimstone. But even in the Bible itself, Jesus Christ does not give any accurate depiction of either state in the afterlife, right? When he talks about hell, he uses a word in Hebrew, Gehenna, that refers to a place where forsaken people like thieves and robbers would be hung on one of the paths to Jerusalem. It was later Christian authors, and especially Dante, right? Dante really embellished our vocabulary for talking about what the contents of hell might be. But it kind of confuses things though, because then it makes us think that those are physical, real places that we'll experience the way we experience the things here. But in the Bahá'í writings, again, it's more of a description of a state of being, of a spiritual mode, than it is a physical or a concrete thing. So Baha'u'llah says, it is clear and evident that all men shall, after their physical death, estimate the worth of their deeds and realize all that their hands have wrought. I swear by the day star that shineth above the horizon of power, they that are the followers of the one true God shall, the moment they depart out of this life, experience such joy and gladness as would be impossible to describe, while they that live in error shall be seized with such fear and trembling, and shall be filled with such consternation as nothing can excel. And it's these states of the soul as it becomes conscious of all the opportunities that it missed and the truth of all the deeds that it committed on this earth. Those are the symbolic heaven and hell that the soul experiences after this life. But in the Baha'i writings, we don't have a concrete place that souls get trapped into for all of eternity. You know, I've read quite a number of these, so I am going to ask someone else, and I'm wondering if Marilyn, if you would be willing to read this next quote for me. Oh, you're on Zoom. Sorry, of course you're on Zoom. You're on mute, Marilyn.
There we go. No created thing shall ever attain to its paradise unless it appeareth in its highest prescribed degree of perfection. For instance, this crystal representeth the paradise of the stone whereof its substance is composed. Likewise, there are various stages in the paradise for the crystal itself. So long as it was stone, it was worthless. But if it attained the excellence of ruby, a potentiality which is latent in it, how much a carat will it be, how much a carat or how much per carat will it be worth? Consider likewise every created thing.
Thank you. So this is the paradise of the human soul, its development, its excellence, discovering the qualities latent within it and refining its potentiality. It is reaching to the depths within oneself and discovering what lies hid there that we discover our paradise. It was described in much more graphic terms, say in the Quran or in some of the books of the Bible, because those were very inspiring images. They gave people a sense of what the paradise meant rather than dictating what the paradise was. And so the Baha'i writings are sort of unsealing some of these mysteries of the books of old and showing us that these relate to spiritual realities and spiritual stations. I will ask whether Sue would read this one.
How many Sues are there? Just one?
I think so, unless you're Susie.
Okay. Okay, the souls of the infidels, however, shall, and to this I bear witness, when breathing their last, be made aware of the good things that have escaped them, and shall bemoan their plight, and shall humble themselves before God. They shall continue doing so after the separation of their souls from their bodies.
Right. And I wanted to include this because it is a serious matter, right? The fact that these are spiritual realities doesn't mean that, okay, we all just do whatever we want. We're being given a priceless opportunity by being alive for this short duration of time that we have available. And it really behooves us to seize the chance. And this next quote, I am going to ask if my wife would read this.
Know thou that the soul of man is exalted above and is independent of all infirmities of body or mind. That a sick person showeth signs of weakness is due to the hindrances that interpose themselves between his soul and his body. For the soul itself remaineth unaffected by the bodily ailments. Consider the light of the lamp. Though an external object may interfere with its radiance, the light itself continueth to shine with undiminished power. In like manner, every malady afflicting the body of man is an impediment that preventeth the soul from manifesting its inherent might and power. When it leaveth the body, however, it will evince such ascendancy and reveal such influence as no force on earth can equal. Every pure, every refined and sanctified soul will be endowed with tremendous power and shall rejoice with exceeding gladness. Baha'u'llah.
And what I really like about this idea that the soul is free of the impediments of the body is because so many people, while living on this earth, their faculties are dimmed by reason of the body they were given, or because of, sicknesses that they may have to endure. I remember one story in Illinois when Nassim and I lived there. There was a woman in our community who used to take care of people at a home for those who were just not able to be a part of society. And so one woman that she was taking care of was a person who had a disorder that rendered her intelligence very, very, very low. And so she really couldn't function much at all. And so she would sit all day long just by herself, really kind of quiet and not interacting. And she wouldn't ever do much or say much, except on the occasions when her mother would visit. And when her mother would visit and this woman would see her, she said it allowed her to understand what it meant for the soul to shine from an individual. So that is the last quote I have for you. I have one last song I wanted to share, not because this quote actually relates to the afterlife, but it just seemed to fit. So I hope that you enjoy it. I've been playing it over and over for myself.
What hath become of the creation and the manifestations thereof? What of the names in their kingdom? Whither are gone all created things? Whether seen or unseen, whether seen or unseen. What of the hidden secrets? Lo, the entire creation hath passed away. Lo, the creation hath passed away. What hath become of the creation and the manifestations thereof? What of the names in their kingdom? Whither are gone all created things? Whether seen or unseen, whether seen or unseen. What of the hidden secrets? Lo, the entire creation hath passed away. Lo, the creation hath passed away. Lo, the entire creation hath passed away. Lo, the creation hath passed away. What of the hidden secrets? Lo, the entire creation hath passed away. Lo, the creation hath passed away. Lo, the entire creation hath passed away. Lo, the creation hath passed away.
Now the room is yours. Whatever questions or comments you may have, or even your own personal experiences.